Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conrad, and this show is where we hear the real stories from real people changing the world. From everyday people to the top celebrities, all the conversations are real, raw, and always unscripted. Thank you for joining me today. Now let's get to today's guest. All right, everybody, welcome to Unscripted One-on-One podcast. Wow, special day today. We just put this together like literally on the fly. Special guest today. I'm gonna let him introduce himself, and then we got stories to tell over the course of this podcast. But let me go ahead and let him introduce himself, tell him about his family, and we'll go from there.
Yes. First of all, Aaron, it's so fun to do this, and it's fun because you were my very first Twitter friend.
I did not know that.
Well, weird. I would say like a genuine friend that we met over Twitter.
Right.
And we actually like got together in person. You actually came down to Nashville, stay with us. We all ran the Nashville half marathon. Yeah, you and Heather came up. I know. I know. And it wasn't weird at all. We kept saying like, should this be weird?
Right.
Like, like we all, and I'm like, oh, it's not weird at all. It's just,
right.
we're just having fun. But
Right.
no, man, that was, I know. And that I'm trying to do the timing. That had to have been like 2009 or something, or 8, something
Right.
like that, which is
Somewhere
crazy.
Yep.
How much life has happened since then.
How many pounds have happened since then?
I'm just, since you had Kurt Harding on not long ago, again, because Kurt is part of the connection too, because we all would interact on Twitter.
Right.
You guys have such beautiful domes. I'm holding back on who I'm really supposed to be. I've got this like half dome, whereas you guys got this beautiful dome.
Right.
And
Right.
so yeah, I keep telling my wife, and you remember Brooke, I mean, she keeps telling me like, no, don't shave it off. I'm like, it's just awkward. I don't know what to do with it when the wind starts flopping. It's just like, I'm like David Spade and Tommy Boy when that fan pops on and his hair just goes straight back. That's me right there. Yes.
That's perfect. And I'm sorry, your name again?
My name is Dave Schroeder. Hello, everyone. So, yes, Aaron and I have known each other for a very long time, as you know, but in a very non-traditional way. I guess it's more normal now, but I think it's just funny. We've all have kind of grown up in our middle age kind of life together. That's the way of putting it, at least from afar. Like, it's always fun when we both have families, we both have ups and downs of life, career. And I remember like, I could just tell like, we clearly liked a lot of the same writers. We still talk about it today. We love a lot of the same movies, same dad jokes, all these things. And like, we pretty much should just be neighbors. We're just separated by a couple states away. That's really all it is. So
yeah, outside of so you're a Cardinals fan, I'm an Indians fan, and and just to give everybody an idea, like you said, I have a friend in Charlotte that we did one a while ago, Ryan Grammatico. Just love that guy to death. He's a brother to me, and he was one of the first. He was one of the OGs when we started the Unscripted podcast. But same thing. I always tell people I met him on the internet, and it always sounds really creepy. It's just a guy I met on the internet. It's like, that's really gross, but it's not gross at all. And then I actually went and stayed at your house, and I stayed at Ryan's house. And so, but no, those are the great things about Twitter, about social media is making the world real small. And, again, you and your bride and were kind enough to invite us to your home. We stayed with you guys. I guess ran. I don't even want to say ran. The Nashville half marathon is the worst thing ever. And the worst part about it was the day we did it. First of all, it was packed, and we couldn't seem to find any kind of pocket for 3 of us to stay together. Right. I mean, we're trying, but, and then we were going down that long hill. You remember that long hill? And then there was an uphill on the other side, and the whole thing's uphill, but there was 2 seconds of a downhill. And I look over and there's a guy juggling. You remember that? Like, he's on the other side, which means that they've already completed most of it and they're on their way back. and the guy was juggling. I'm like, I'm trying not to die, and this guy's
Yes.
over here juggling while he's running.
Yeah, it was on Music Row, which is kind of the cool like road back and forth where all the country music labels
Yep.
are. And no, you're right. There's all these people just putting you to shame, these like real runners here. And yeah, man, that was, and also remember we got there, like the traffic was terrible. It was a weird setup to where you had to go park near where the finish line was, and then they were going to bus you to the beginning.
Right.
But it was like just crammed. So we were just waiting on a bus. We got there a little bit later to park.
Yeah.
And we left plenty early. I mean, I'd done this race before, and but like we got off the bus at Centennial Park, which is where it begins, and it had already began. So we're like running off the bus.
We ran a 5K before we got to the half.
Yeah, sprinting just to get to that very starting line, just to get to the starting line. Right. And then we're like, oh gosh, we're like, so you're already kind of nervous just from that. And but it made it very memorable. And but then there was not just the race, but the infamous dinner that night where don't worry, nothing bad happened. We were supposed to eat at Mellow Mushroom, and we put our name in Franklin, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. We put our name in, and we're still waiting for our table as of
they still have never called me.
Still never called.
No, and I mentioned this on the Kurt Harding episode, which not to promote the own podcast, but and somehow I don't know how that. And again, that's the beauty of the internet and social media. Is you get to meet people, and I think it may have been through you that we met Kurt, but all of you all have been just great people for me and support for me, and just awesome contacts. And so we would now actually let me reverse, because the truth is we did this a couple years in a row. We were crazy enough to do it a few years in a row. Right. And the first year, so you and I, gosh, let me rewind even further back. We met because of Max Lucado.
Yes.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And I don't remember somehow through an email or
you used me to get to Max. It's okay. It's all right. I've been used in lots of ways.
Never met him, actually. I met him, but not because of us. But somewhere somebody was like, I think it was Ashley. Is it McBride? Is that her name? Ashley somebody?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of her maiden name now.
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Yes. But Ashley, thank you.
Ashley.
Thank you. Sorry.
So Ashley at Thomas Nelson, somehow I got connected with her, and I think it was due to a launch of one of his books or something. And she says, there's this guy you got to meet, because we were Carolina fans somewhere along it. So she connects me to you. We connect, and then at some point we say, hey, we're coming down to run this Nashville half marathon. And you're like, all right, come stay at my house. So we connect there. And then you're like, hey, let's go out to dinner the night before. I think this is how this all kind of came together. And then it was like, hey, you got to meet Susan, now it's Maines, who.
Yes. Yeah. Susan and Matt. Yeah.
Love them. And so you got to meet this couple, and you got to meet this guy who I don't think Kurt was at Thomas Nelson anymore. And then multiple others, right? So then you say, we're going to go to, and this is, I don't think I've ever even told you this story. So you said, we're going to go to songwriter night at this place called Puckett's.
Yes.
And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, I see some like dude sitting on a stool, writing on a legal pad. And I'm like, well, man, you're a local guy. I'm going to trust you on this. We don't know. Again, we've met on the internet. So I'm like, all right, well, that sounds kind of cool. But, in my mind, I just see this like dude with his guitar. And so then we go to Puckett's. We're standing outside, and this guy with an awesome mullet walks by, and we're waiting for our table. This guy with this mullet that puts shame to all other mullets walks by. I'm like, check out that dude's mullet. And then we go in, and it turns out there's, I don't know, 3-4 people on stage, and there's actual video of this. And if I had good technical skill, I'd show this video. Maybe I'll put it in the blog post so people can see it.
All right.
Sitting in Puckett's, and they start singing their songs. And this guy with the awesome mullet says, hey, this is one of the first songs I ever did or wrote, or I don't know, something. And he starts singing Amy's Back in Austin. And I'm like, that's right. I remember looking across the table. I'm like, man, my son is named Austin because of the song Amy's Back in Austin. It was Tim Rushlow, the lead singer of a band called Little Texas, which some people may remember. And he wrote the song Amy's Back in Austin. I told Heather when we were dating, if we ever have a little girl, we're gonna name her Amy Austin, because I just thought it was amazing. Amy Austin Conrad. Love how it rolled off the tongue. And then we found out we were having a boy. I'm like, we're going Austin. It's Austin. That's the name. So I got to walk up to Tim Rushlow after the songwriter night and say, hey, you wrote that song. My kid is named Amy, or is named Austin. Just an amazing moment. So again, really long story, but it was awesome.
Yeah, that is such a Nashville Franklin thing to happen. I remember that happened. I was like, yeah, because you'd already told me the story when I asked about, I already talked about like where you got into the kids' names. And I mean, it's not like I planned any of that. I didn't even know who wrote the song, didn't know any of that. And here you go. But it is funny. Yeah. And for those who have not been in Nashville, like, yeah, you kind of don't know you're running into someone who's maybe responsible for like the biggest hit in music, and it's usually not like the actual like singer. I mean, you see celebrities, you do, but it's more everyone behind the scenes that makes the song. And I think that's what's fascinating. So it's like, yeah, that guy has a normal house. He's got a little studio in his basement or something, and he writes music and he's doing very well, clearly.
And an amazing mullet. He probably still has that mullet.
Amazing.
Good for Tim Rushlow, because most of us can't rock a mullet anymore.
Yeah, that's what it takes, apparently. Okay, all right, yeah.
Anyway, so Dave puts together this night of these incredible people that to this day are still, just incredible people in my life. And so for that, thank you. And then I think it repeated again the next year. And I think we did it 3 times. And then I'm like, Heather, I'm done. Let's just go down to Nashville. We'll have dinner with everybody. We don't have to run 12 miles to do that, because it's the worst 12 miles I've ever run in my life.
It is. It's hard. That was the last long distance run I have done. Yeah, I think so. That was it. I finally said no more. I did a bunch leading up to that, and it was hard. I didn't train for that one, so it just hurt.
It was brutal. So, all right. And I think you still made it finish before I did. And I did train. I remember texting you being like, well, I'm up to 7 miles now. I think I'm going about a 10-minute pace. And anyway, so, all right. So tell everybody what it is you do, because that's where our connecting point was. And I do have a quote from a Dave quote that you gave me many years ago that I have still held on to, that I'll break out in a minute. But we originally met again because Thomas Nelson, because you were working at Thomas Nelson, and I don't know if we're allowed to say that, but hopefully that's okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, so Aaron, what you're referring to is just working in Christian book publishing, and so I started working at Thomas Nelson in 2006 early on. So I'm getting closer to 15 years, and it's, I'm still doing it. It's just kind of meandered kind of in and out since then. But yeah, I worked in an imprint called Nelson Books, which is kind of the core imprint of Thomas Nelson. And then there was so those are like, I didn't work directly on everyone's, but if you think of like Donald Miller and John Maxwell and John Eldridge, they were published under that imprint. And then there was a point where we started up Bill Bennett as well. Yeah, we worked on Bill Bennett. There's a point we started up our own imprint for Max Lucado. Max is probably one of the most long-term, famous writers within Nelson, but beloved. I remember when I became a Christian, and anytime you become part of the Lucado team, they ask the question like, "What was the first Lucado book you read?" And for mine, it was soon after I became a Christian, like 1995, and it was In the Grip of Grace. And
that's the one, right?
Yeah, and it's so good. And Grace, Grace does not get old, but I'm very blessed because they started up a department for Max, just for a team focused on Max. And so, Ashley, who was referencing, she and I, she's the first person I hired, I think, at that time, but it was fun. That's really where I learned publishing. I had a great mentor, David Moberg, who is Max's longtime publisher. And although I was head of marketing, he just learned everything about publishing. We would go through learning about the financial analysis of publishing, how to understand, how to do a pro forma, what to do. There was my first year working on Max was the first year Max had ever taken a 1-year break from writing.
Right.
So what a great year financially to be able to do. I look at David, I'm like, what are you doing to me? Is this your way of kicking me out? But no, it was great because it pushed us to creativity to say, we've got this wealth of content. Max had a heart surgery after he did the book 316, and it was like right in the middle of it coming out, and he just needed 1 year to just rest. And even though he was still writing a little bit, we just postponed a new release for another year, which was that book Fearless. That was that first one after.
Yep.
But we had a year where we had to be really creative to look at his backlist, which is all the books that he's published in the past, and figure out new ways to either republish them, repackage them with new covers, new formats, come up with some new content too. And, it wasn't my idea, but we developed a book called Cast of Characters, which was like taking all of his stories and other books about characters in the Bible and put them together and have some new introductions that Max wrote. And it was great. It was fun. But I learned to appreciate publishing and the art of just what it takes to create a book. These are things in marketing they don't really teach you. You just need to find a publisher who just loves the craft, and that was it. So we met in that time because it was probably approaching Fearless. So imagine the economy collapsing, right? And Max, of course, Max is always like in tune with like what people need. He's just got, I keep telling him like before like things of the last few years, he writes a book called Anxious for Nothing. He understands people are dealing with anxiety. What does the Word of God have to tell us about that? And what are the stories to be able to help people with? Well, yeah, of course. Oh, his latest book, You Are Never Alone. I mean, come on, in a year. And people were like, oh, he wrote that because of it's 2020 COVID. I'm like, no, he preached that message like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So like the Lord just wants to use someone like that. Well, Fearless, there's a lot of fear, of course, going on with the economy collapsing. We didn't know what was going on, right?
Right.
But just to illustrate kind of where we were in social media then, I think I'm like talking to Ashley and I'm like, Ashley, we need to buy the hashtag Fearless book. And she's like, buy it? You can't buy a hashtag. It just kind of happens, Dave. And we didn't know any bit of how any of that worked, because Twitter was still like a couple years old at that point. But we just, it was just funny. I mean, it was my first marketing campaign was a MySpace campaign. So come on. I mean, I'm just a hack book marketer, really.
Right.
That's it. On an Erwin McManus book, since you like Erwin McManus. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been fun. So I did that. I stayed at Thomas Nelson until 2011, something like that. And I left to go work for a marketing agency for a while. And it was kind of this test of like, would I miss publishing? And, sometimes you get into something and you knew you liked it, but you also are like, man, is this something I'm going to do for the rest of my career? I wasn't 100% sure of that. I knew I really enjoyed books and I loved the experience, the ministry value, but I also knew I just need to see what it's like helping out publishers from a different perspective. And even though the firm I was with, they worked on a lot of different things, ministries and so on. Of course, I was the publishing guy. So like all my clients were publishing related. So I never really left. I remember doing work for B&H Publishing, and that's how my job with them / Lifeway came about. They needed help in communications, and I just missed being in books, full time. And so I did that for 7 years until this past year, working in communications marketing. So doing a lot of similar things, but they're more of a church publisher, and which I really enjoyed too, from the ministry perspective. I learned a lot about how the church works. And I would say my deepening interest for theology came out in that time. But my love for Tommy Boy has never gone away. So I'm okay. Don't worry. No. But no, you can't I kind of have to test people out. Like, you meet a lot of serious people in the church world, right? You kind of want to find out like, who are the people I can really talk to? Who are the people who can put up with a middle school fart joke, just, and roll with me, and like be entertained for hours. Like, that's it. And that's the thing, people, you need your middle school friend who you can just text stupid things too. And I'm not nothing wrong, just
Right.
stupid humor things that only you guys would appreciate because you were a middle schooler once and you've never really grown up. Well,
Right.
that's basically me right there.
Right.
And the thing is, our wives know it. They
Right.
know they've married like this goon who has never really grown up. I mean, we've tried. We know how to put it on. We know how to do the mature thing.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like what we want to do is watch Dumb and Dumber and Tommy Boy and be absolutely fine by that.
That's right.
So,
I think if you look at Heather's profile on Twitter, it says something about raising 3 kids and a husband. I'm pretty sure it says that, because that's about accurate.
yes.
I don't, sometimes you just never grow up. So, but no, that's an amazing journey. So here's the quote that you gave me many years ago. And at the time, I was kind of in that blogging space and thought I had some kind of voice. And I remember talking about writing a book, which our friend from the Nashville Nights, Rachel Wojo, shout out Rachel.
Yes.
One of my guests earlier, amazing story. And she has absolutely gotten after it and done it. I didn't have the guts to pull through, but you said something I never, ever forgotten. And I think it's true in even the podcast space. It's true in many, many things. You said nothing is new under the sun. I will never forget that. I remember I was talking about what should I call this thing? And should I write this book? A lot of people want me to write this book. And I'm like, and you said, man, there's nothing new under the sun. What is going to be different about yours that hasn't already been written or hasn't already been done? And I'll never forget that, because I
didn't sound very encouraging, by the way.
No, it was actually, it was good, because I'm like, you're right. Like, what am I going to call this thing? It's going to be some coffee table book like Seinfeld. And I don't know what to call it. So I've never done it. And it wasn't because, those words, but I think they certainly helped me keep perspective. And one, there's zero money in this process, and you've been in a long time, unless you're Max Lucado, Erwin McManus, Donald Miller, unless you're a guy like that. And even then, they've got multiple other streams of income. There's not a ton of money in the book space, right? It's just not, just people think you write a book and all of a sudden you're living down in the Keys on something, and you got a boat with your name on the back of it, or the book's name on the back of it, and that's not true.
Right. And the other thing is, like, a good example is John Grisham or Ernest Hemingway. Let's just think of like some very popular writers. At the end of the day, like, well, for Grisham, there was a while after he became successful in the 90s. He, of course, was not practicing law anymore because he was making so much off of Time to Kill in The Firm and Pelican Brief and all those. So he got out of it. But he ended up going back into practice again and do some things, because part of it was just making sure you don't lose your edge, and also being in tune with stories that are out there. And, Hemingway was always, then Hemingway was an article newspaper writer. That's why he writes in such short, terse sentences, is because he knows space is precious. And so he would write novels that way too. And good descriptions, but like hard stops. Yes. So like he never lost something like that. No, yes, those guys are great writers, sure. But in other words, like, I think we get so many ideas by just living life. Like, if you lock yourself in a basement all day and just write, I'm like, sure, you can come up with some great fiction stories, perhaps let your imagination run wild. But at the end of the day, you're living life. And even though you're right, that bit of wisdom from Ecclesiastes still rings true, it is meant to be encouraging to also say, like, listen, just because someone else wrote a book on a topic you kind of want to write about doesn't mean that you shouldn't either. Now, you need to be respectful and just know that, hey, listen, still, what is different about it? What sets this apart? And I never finished. Like, I'm a literary agent now. I left, working direct in that part of publishing now. So I'm helping like that early part of the process where I'm working with authors just to encourage them and also say, listen, you've got to continue to beat this thing up to make it better, to get it prepared to help answer that question for a publisher. Because they're wondering what sets us apart in 2020 or 22, whenever it's going to come out. And but be encouraged just to know, like, there have been more books about grace since In the Grip of Grace came out that have been wonderful, more about prayer, more about life transformation. First of all, a memoir is your story. It's your story. Sorry, there's no other. There may
Yeah.
be certain themes that are in there, but guess what? All themes at the end of the day are God's themes. I mean, that's what I love about it, is just saying like, no, the Lord uses all these individuals for his glory. That means the journey you're on, the lessons you're learning are absolutely for this greater purpose that sometimes you can't see. So as your
Right.
friend here in 2020, I mean, I'm going to say like, Aaron, the Lord's not done. All right. I'm going to have to stay on you until this thing is written. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And the literary agent to call when you're ready. That's all I'm
Right.
saying. So, all right. So
100%.
yeah. But no,
Yeah.
be encouraged. Yeah. Anyone who's, and you know what, but it is one of the things just about writing is like, there's some people who write to say, I want it to be the next bestseller. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, you got to clear that out of your head for a second and
Yeah.
just say, hey, listen, anyone who has become a bestseller can't claim one or two or three things and how that happened. The reality is there's so many things beyond their control happened, how got into certain people's hands,
Right.
and it was read and passed along. Because trust me, I know a lot of amazing books that have not been read widely.
Right.
It just, they didn't catch on. You wonder like, why is that?
Yeah.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
And that's all right. It's meant for perhaps for this season, for this type of person. And you have an appreciation for that. Whereas then there's some book, and because I know too many books that are terrible that become bestsellers.
Right.
Terrible.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
America gets dumber by some of these books. And so, but
Billy
but you
Madison.
realize, well, it's the same thing. It's
Yeah.
like, why are there certain, just like with there's stupid movies, then there's like really smart comedies, but they don't do as well. I'm like, yeah, because it doesn't work as wide.
Right.
They're all funny. They're just different funny. I think it works the same way with books. So.
And I think it works that way in marketing. So you spent, you had time in marketing. I've tell people that, especially in the social media space, so I've had two things go viral on the blog. Neither one of them was planned. Neither one was calculated. I didn't spend a dime on advertising or marketing. And Rachel and I talked about this. You and Kurt and I talked about this. Yeah. You will pour your heart into it, which I don't really write much anymore at all on the blog. But for many years, you would pour your heart into this post, and you're like, this is the one. This one is going to change the world. I feel it. And you put it out there and it gets like 2 likes, and you're like, what the heck? And then you put some stupid post out on a Friday at 4:30 because you feel like you need to put something out, and the thing goes viral, and the example for me was that one that went viral, 2 that went viral. One was Dollar Shave Club. Shout out Dollar Shave Club, because I never have to buy a razor again in my life, because, and honestly, I just wanted to try it out. And a bunch of people on Twitter, I think, were like, hey, man, let me know how that goes. And I'm like, well, I don't want to reply to all these people, so I'm just going to do a quick post. So I do this post, put the affiliate link in, and next thing you know, I got $1,500 worth of credits on Dollar Shave Club. So again, I've got razors for days in my house because I couldn't spend all the money. I think I'm down to about $100 now, because I've given them out for gifts. I ran into a friend at the grocery store one day, and he's buying a razor. And I'm like, hey man, let me hook you up. Gave him a box of Dollar Shave Club 3 razor, whatever. Yes. And then the other one, of course, was the one that I've mentioned on other podcasts, and that's the rules for my son. The funny thing was, I had posted that a year earlier, and nobody responded. And I don't know why. I think I was bored, or I needed to put something out. So I just reposted it, put a new picture on it. And next thing you know, the thing goes viral. 5 million hits, literally 5 million hits.
I mean,
how does that happen? Like, I didn't plan that. It just happened,
Yeah.
And I think that's true in anything, as you just said, with books or movies or those things. Sometimes it just hits a stream, and you just got to sit back and hope that, and then there's a lot of people, I think, out there that put out enough content that eventually it's going to do that. And anyway, I've been very fortunate. And none of that was because I'm wise or smart. It just happened. And thank God for that.
No, well, I think it was earnest. I think you made a connection with other fathers out there, and mothers too, who yearn for that for their son, if they don't have a strong father-son relationship, or they maybe do, but don't know how to express it. And you expressed it perhaps in like a very practical and loving, caring way, the way you did. And it doesn't have to always be this like thing. You were listing these things out, and it was just great bits of wisdom. And, I keep a like a Google Doc open of like advice for the kids. Like I don't even know what the point of it beyond to be handed down with them. And I'm like, oh yeah, I need to write that down real quick. I just keep it open all the time. And I don't know if there's something, I'm not dying. I'm not anything.
Right.
I just think, but I keep, it's funny. I tell my parents too, I'm like, you guys are retired, write some stuff down, please.
Right. Absolutely.
Pass it down.
Sure.
I know, but I love that when I was seeing that happening, and then suddenly the news is calling you and all these things. I thought, how fun is this?
It was absolutely nuts. And my favorite part is I didn't write it. Some other guy wrote it. I took it off Tumblr. I found it on Tumblr, and I told this story a couple podcasts ago with somebody else. I didn't write it, and so I get this email one day, and he's like, "Hey man, I see I see this is doing pretty well. Could I get a little credit?" And I'm like, "Did you read it?" Because at the very beginning of the post, I said, "I pulled this off of Twitter. Here's this guy's," and I gave the link. And the guy, look, you figure, put your mind around this: 4 or 5 million hits.
Yeah.
If you figure $1 a hit, man, I'm not working a day in the rest of my life, right? I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
And the thing is, so anyway, I wish the guy nothing but luck. And I actually reached out to him about 2 weeks ago, and I said, "Why don't you come on the podcast? Let's tell your story, share your book." Because again, I'm just trying to stay out of the way, man. All I did was copy and paste off Tumblr.
Yeah.
And the thing just went viral. And I'm sure he's made a couple of bucks. It'd be nice if he slid me a little royalty check instead of yelling at me one day. But anyway, I invited him on. I'm like, "Hey, why don't you come on? Let's tell your story." And he said no. So I think he's still mad. But I clearly gave him credit. But anyway, so viral, you never know. And that's your point. But so that, I think, go back to Max, that or McManus, or now Bob Goff, guys that we talk about a lot, for them to have just hit after hit after hit. It's the same in music, right? I mean, you have a one-time hit that goes viral, or you have a long career of just CD after CD after CD of hits. Like, I think it's hard. You live in Nashville, so you probably appreciate that more than anybody. Sustainability in any industry, and particularly in the book writing business, because you can tell a story once, or a family story, or I remember, you might remember this name from the Giants. Dave Dravecky wrote a book called Comeback. When he remember, he lost his arm.
Oh, right? I remembered. Yeah, absolutely.
And Comeback was an incredible book, and all respect to Dave Dravecky. He wrote another book called When You Can't Come Back, and it was nowhere near as good as Comeback. Like, Comeback was one of my favorite books ever. When You Can't Come Back was like, well, we had a lot of success with Comeback. Let's write another one. You know what I mean? I got to think that's true in the book industry. Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of success breeds success in publishing. When you've got a winner, it's a lot easier to follow up with one in some ways. It's not like, they say sophomore album, sophomore slump for artists. Well, with books, again, it always is going to be like, I think you can fool them for a few weeks, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be a good book that they're transformed by, and that they're ultimately going to want to share. Like, the thing that has not changed since I started, even pre like digital being the biggest driver of book sales, is, books succeed or fail based on personal recommendation. And it's about trust. It's about, who do you trust to provide you book recommendations? And that could be someone on TV, by the way. It could be your best friend. It could be your pastor. It could be whomever in your kind of circle that you trust. And so when it comes to, trust me, I have no idea about Max Lucado book sales anymore, because I haven't worked on Max a long time, but I'm sure there've been some years that one hasn't done as well as the other. And it could just be the topic wasn't as provocative is not the word, just as powerful as another one. But then as I told you before, like, then you get one that just hits exactly how we all feel, and you are never alone. And of the gift of the Holy Spirit, being with us as God's gift to us, until Jesus comes back. I mean, it's just things like that. And you realize, okay, that's it. God has given us other people to encourage you. God has given us Zoom. We're on a Zoom call. I'm sorry, if this pandemic happened 20 years ago, can you imagine?
No.
I mean, we'd be able to call each other, but we all know that wouldn't be quite the same. We're able to keep doing business for the most part really well.
Right.
We know it's tricky getting together in person, but we also know, you know what, we're able to keep things going as
Yeah.
best as possible. So there's a lot of blessing in this. I think if you really dig in. But back to your question about kind of really what distinguishes books, um, there are some people have this dream, this idea of what their book's going to look like, and it doesn't pan out the way they want, and so they wonder, okay, the book didn't sell that well, and what do they do next? And I
Yeah.
always say, like, hey, listen, God inspires you to keep writing another story. Awesome, go for it.
Right.
The other thing is, there's a guy we just had on, Jared C. Wilson. He wrote a book called Echo Island, and Jared's been writing. He's written 20 books on theology, and now suddenly he's writing a fiction book
Hmm.
for it's more of a YA book too, because it's
Right.
really centered around 14s. I mean, I'm like, how do you kind of switch to that? He's like, at the end of the day, like, this is really what I want to do, is just do storytelling. I try and do that through theology writing, of course, because that's the grand story. But I think in some, my point is, even with Jared, is that I think we all, at the end of the day, there's something that ultimately is within writing that just connects with us. And sometimes I think it's just, you need to get it out of you,
Yeah.
and just trust in the Lord,
Hmm.
whatever is supposed to be from there. It may sell one copy, five copies, 500, 500,000, who knows? But, and don't worry about who the publisher is, or even if you self-publish it, whatever, because the spirit of, of your blog post, that is really, it's a legacy message about, at the end of the day, we're trying to hand things down to this next generation, whether they are our children or another. And because we're not going to be around forever.
Right.
And even what you're doing right now is a gift to them that they'll be able to watch for years to come too, and realize, this is really what made dad tick,
That's right.
I
Right.
mean, really, I mean, that's which I love. Like, you have not changed in the most wonderful way,
Yeah.
because, like, you haven't. And don't lose that. And I will stay on you on that book, because I think you're meant to write it.
Mm.
Sometimes it's like God hasn't done, like, working in you in terms of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
No, it's almost like, think about that. Since we first started talking about a book, like, a lot's happened in life now. I mean, we were just talking about, like, now you've got, two kids in college, one in high school. Like, you could, I mean, an empty nester here soon. Okay,
Right.
well, you'll have a different time to reflect now,
Yeah.
which is important and makes a huge impact on the way you would write and tell
Yeah.
stories. Because
Yeah.
let's be real, we're on the second half of life here, and
That's
we're
right. Back
trying to,
line.
but when but at the same time, you want to make the time count, and
Yeah.
so it's worth doing it. So I know someone who's listening, watching this, they, I don't know, I try and be encouraging to people and just say, pretty much, I mean, I'm in the middle of probably 6 or 7 books that are kind of out there being pitched right now, and I've had a bunch of them that have landed last minute,
Yeah.
type thing. Some that just, man, we're getting rejected left and right. Then you get one that just is perfect. I've had some that, man, first publisher jumped right on it. They were so
Wow.
excited about it. And some you get bidding over it,
Yeah.
which is all fine. All of them are different. All of them have their own purpose too. But then there's someone, there's people I've sold, like, just because an agent's not representing you doesn't mean that you shouldn't be just right.
Right.
Writers write. When you were writing, as you've been writing the blog posts, like, at the end of the day, that's training.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're learning about what connects with people. You also are just, it's flowing out of you. I mean, you
Hmm.
you need to do that. So I don't know. The more I do this, and now being on this side of the agenting world, of kind of, how do I serve publishers and help authors early on, man, there's a lot of room out
Yeah.
there.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of really cool options on how to publish too, and how to get it to the masses, if that ends up being something. So I don't know. I'm encouraged, but again, like, think about the timing. Like, I'll be
Right.
on you, because that's what I should do as a friend, because I think you have it, but the timing's right.
Yeah.
When it's right for you.
Yeah. And I think this is what we're doing right now, has almost, because the blog I put on ice for a few years. I mean, outside of reposting some stuff every now and then or writing one, I always write one every birthday for my kids. It seems like
Yeah.
just to honor them. But outside of that, it was really on ice for a few years now, because I think blogging changed too. You know, blogging was everybody
Yeah.
that it was almost like the minor leagues for people that thought they could write a book. You know, and so you know, and that's no disrespect, because somebody like Rachel, who did have a book in her and has multiple
Yeah.
books in her,
Yeah.
she actually took that, and that was her launching point. For me, it was just, you know, but it's interesting you mentioned that, Dave, because and my dog's barking in the background, which is the beauty of
I love it.
Unscripted.
I
But
love it.
you know, I think, and I completely lost my train of thought. I think I started this. So I started this over COVID. I did one,
Yeah.
and it was called the Four Corners Podcast, and it was completely a train wreck. And I only did one. And then, you know, a friend of mine who, and I think you might even remember this, but around that same time, that 2009 time frame, I lost a friend to colon cancer who was my age, three kids who had the exact same age. So it was like watching myself in the mirror and what he went through. And recently his wife, because now fast forward, we're 11, 12 years later, and his wife had mentioned that his kids don't remember him. They don't remember. So she had reached out to say, you know, does anybody have any stories? Or so she's doing a really cool thing for Christmas, and I hopefully they're not watching this, because then I just ruined the Christmas surprise. Maybe I should have said
there's the power of editing. You can hit this part.
I'm going to take that out. So take two. Anyway, a friend of mine recently talked about her kids, and it reminded me that, you know what, that's why I'm doing this. You said it perfectly. And that's why you're a great friend. Is this isn't for me. This isn't really, honestly, this is for my kids. Cause one day I'm not going to wake up, or I'm going to be whatever it is. And I want them to know, you know, you get to meet people like yourself in Nashville, that and people from all walks of life that do all kinds of things. And at the end of the day, that's really what this is about. One day they'll look back at this, and hopefully, if YouTube's still around, or they can find the digital archives somewhere, because who knows what's next, you know, as far as technology. But they'll be able to look at this and say, "Wow, that was pretty cool." You know, Dad knew some really cool people. Had nothing to do with me. It was that God in my life, God has introduced me to some amazing people, which has allowed me to write a story, you know, that may never be written in a book, but it's allowed me to live a story, I should say, that has been awesome. And I've told my wife so many times, if I never wake up tomorrow, man, I've lived, and it's been awesome. And so, anyway.
Yeah. I taught there's two ways to look at this. It makes you really appreciate your immediate family, and because like you have more effect on them, positive or negative, than anyone else in your surroundings. And so it would have been a Sunday school class that we did a church history one. So I see church history. It's really fun, which, by the way, when you've never taken a class in church history, but you have to teach one, all you got to do is be one chapter ahead, folks. That's it. One chapter ahead of everyone else.
Right.
No, but I was trying to help them out and say, hey, listen, there are, I can't remember, whatever. I would say this often. I said, well, can anyone tell me like much about your grandparents? And so they, you know, there's a lot of nodding. Can you tell me much about your great grandparents? A few people nod. Tell me about your great grandparents. Right? So now we're going 100 years ago, right? Wow. And like, there's like nothing, nothing. I mean, and so basically I said, okay, guys, 100 years from now, you all will more or less be forgotten. I know we have a digital footprint, but you now have to assume for a second that there's so many more videos and so many other things. And yes, I know your life can be archived and things you do here, but the reality is, you know, you're kind of going to be forgotten, and you got to deal with that. Earthly forgotten, that is. So, but isn't that like the most freeing thing too, just in terms of recognizing like, okay, well, we are his, we are the Lord's. And so what we do should be a reflection of him. But it's also a responsibility to say, listen, Lord, like, let me live for your glory, whatever that looks like, whatever you're inspiring me to do, let it be to shine your light. And so like, it's a different way of looking at it. Then it makes it less about you and makes it more about how the Lord can use that, because because I think we were talking about in that class about some like minor characters and stories, and like, like you even read them in the Bible. Like, what about this guy? You don't even know his name, but he's really
Right.
important because he's
Right.
there.
Yeah.
He's a witness to this,
Yeah.
and he did this or that, and but he has a role, and how God wants to use him uniquely in that point. And so I always wonder, like, people who want to be famous, I'm like, do you really want to be famous? Do you
Yeah.
really want to, I said, do you really want to deal with the modern issues of what that looks like? Because it's quite
Right.
a responsibility. And the reality is most people don't do well with it.
Yeah.
And so we're not equipped to deal with those things.
Yeah.
Even in the world of COVID we're in, we know way too much about what's going on, or have to spend so much time questioning whether it's true or not true.
Right.
These are things we did not have to deal with before.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be so concerned about, like, I remember there's a day when you've got racial tensions happening. This is like June. You've got COVID numbers. You've got uncertainty with work. You've got so you got some personal things. You got some macro things in the United States. And then I remember, like, Indian troops are fighting with Chinese troops in the Himalayas. Nothing to do with my day-to-day life.
Right.
But I thought, like, gosh, I'm just kind of overwhelmed. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
supposed to know all this stuff is going on. I'm
Yeah.
just, there used to be people who were just in a village mentality, and they just
Right.
had to worry about what they're eating tonight. And I
Right.
know that has other issues, but I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it's freeing, and I think there's this point, like, here we are, Aaron, like we're in this back half of life, and you look at the first half and you're like, man, I know you can see why a movie like City Slickers gets made. And it's so
Absolutely.
true. It's
Right.
so true. You got
Right.
guys whose lives are falling apart, but they're trying to figure out how to go ahead. And what's the whole point? And
Right.
oh yeah, whether you're a Christian or not, you question those things. And
Sure.
I would lie if I said I didn't still have desires to, famous is not the word, just to have that like impactful thing.
Yeah.
But I've also realized, and this is part of what the whole agenting thing is, it's not about, it is, I am best when I'm behind the scenes helping others out. That's my,
Hmm.
like, at the end of the day, I realized, like, the more I make it about me, the more I fail.
Right. Sure.
I just realized, like, I'm just not good at doing that. I'm
Yeah.
better at helping people behind the scenes to this and that. I take a greater joy in helping them if they feel like the Lord is trying to use them with a particular message. And I'll tell you this, the greatest joy is being an agent so far as helping someone who never thought they'd get published. All right.
Yeah.
So you and it's the same thing with and ones who just, they're just this discouragement, and it was like, let's see what the Lord does. And I don't know, it's fun I've had a few of those so far which were been unexpected. And you at first there's this temptation to have this pride of like, oh, I made that happen. I'm
Right.
like, Lord, no.
Yeah.
No, it's like this person didn't believe at all that they could, but I said, but they walked ahead in faith. And I said, no, I said, let's see what the Lord does.
Mm-hmm.
If you approach it as you're trying to give the glory to him in this, then you'll accept whatever the consequences are from it that go with that, good or bad. If it's not meant to be published, not meant to be published, that's okay.
Right. Right.
But if it is, boy, that's cool to see. Then you get a front row seat.
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm behind the scenes. I'm like there's the theater, and I'm back in the green room. I'll see what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I mean, and I don't want to get off of that point before we've it's amazing how quickly this always goes. And as you said, I said before I clicked record, we got to do this more often, especially when we have the technology, we have the ability. It's just been so good to see your face, to catch up, to laugh a little bit about some of those funny memories. But before we get off, I want to make sure we get all your links, all your contact, because again, as you and I both said, who knows where this is going to land, and there could be somebody hoping to write a book, all those things. But you just touched on something that I think is very, very true. And I'll say that because I want to make sure I honor you in that. I don't know Kurt Harding. I don't know Matt Maines. I don't know Susan. I don't know Jason Jones and his family and his wonderful story. I don't get to meet Tim Rushlow. I could go on and on and on if I don't meet you. Right? And So if you're looking at yourself and you're saying, I like to be behind the scenes, or I like to be that guy in the Bible that nobody knows his name, just know that there's people that do know, right? And I'm that guy. I'm that guy
That's
today,
kind.
because honestly, you have been a connector that has spawned just great content and
Yeah.
context for me with all those people.
Yeah.
Every one of those names I just mentioned, I love those people dearly, and I
Yeah.
to this day,
Yeah.
we're internet friends, I guess you'd say, because we don't live together, but we're in a
Yeah.
community together.
Yeah.
Those dinners on whatever night it was, Saturday night after we were,
Yeah.
or what, Friday night, whenever we ate,
Yeah. Yes.
before or after the race. I'm probably a little delirious from running the
I
race,
know.
but those dinners were amazing, and
Yeah.
it's a time I will forever cherish. And
Yeah.
what happened at those dinners, that community of
Yeah.
being together and meeting one another and caring for one another, and that, if anything, that's the church before the
Mhm.
church. So
Yeah.
I don't want to, I didn't want to blow past what you just said, because whether I write a book or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is you've been an incredible connector, and I've never,
Yeah.
ever, 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 ever forgotten that.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. Now, that being said, because I want to make sure I honor you in that way, because it's all true, man. It's straight from the
Oh,
heart. Now, besides that, where's all the links? So if anybody catches
the
this,
links.
if we go viral, how do they contact you? Where do they find you? What's your Twitter? What's the best way? If I want to write a book and I'm
Yeah.
listening to this, how do I get a
Yeah.
hold of you?
I am probably most active on Twitter still. David M. Schroeder, Schroeder. You can guess whether it's pronounced either way. It really doesn't matter anymore. That's what I know. People ask, I'm like, I don't care. What do you want it to be? I
Whatever.
really don't care. It's just a crowd name that
Right.
got carried on, and here I am. No, it is pronounced Schrader, but I never, like, my kids are always like, why don't you correct people when they say Schroeder? I'm like, does it really matter? It doesn't
That's
matter
right.
because it's spelled like Schroeder.
Yeah.
I said
Yeah.
somewhere along the line it got anglicized a little bit. So, but they didn't spell it. So I don't know what's going on. It's weird. No, but yeah, so I'm pretty active there. But yeah, you were alluding to podcast I've co-hosted for a few
Right.
years, and it's
Yep.
we interview authors and people in the book world about it's called the Table of Malcontents, and
Mhm.
apostrophes around the mal. So it's fun. I get book recommendations in a lot of different plays. That's kind of my book club. And,
Mhm.
so, like I mentioned that author, Jared, we had on because I was very curious about a guy who writes theology, but then all of a sudden wants to do a fiction book. And I was just
Right.
curious about, like, I knew that informed the way he does theology writing. And I was curious about how that transitioned. And, but it's fun. I get so many book recommendations that way. I realized 2 years ago, and my friend Aaron Armstrong, he's the one who started it up under a different name years ago, but our offices were right next to each other at Lifeway, and we would talk books all the time. And it's just like we're doing, like, why don't we just press record and talk about
That's
this stuff
right.
more?
Right.
I
Yep.
mean, there's a part of it that's that, but I said, well, we need to make it useful. It needs to be something that's fun for people in its niche, because not everyone wants to sit and listen to a 45-minute to an hour book podcast.
Yeah.
So we do end up talking about some other things, but I think I like, I love good writing, and I've become a better reader, a better person in publishing for doing something like that. I get exposed to some people, and it's kind of a good way to also just, I don't know, like anything, like, you always need to be learning, always need to be challenging yourself. Like, it's my version of cross training. Like, I have
Right.
to, like, constantly be around other people who are in
Yeah.
the industry, and invite in authors, different publishers, different agents, so on, to talk about these things, and it's fun. So yeah, we've done it for 3 years now, which is weird. We've had a variety of other co-hosts, and it's fun. Yeah, Aaron's the one who does the editing, producing, everything else. I'm booker, interviewer, and other things like that. So it's amusing. But yeah, so it's been fun. So yeah, you can listen. It's amusing. There are some, if you really want to go back and listen to some, I would say, some interesting episodes. We interviewed Karen Swallow Pryor, who's a great writer and a great person at the intersection of understanding literature and theology together. She's just a great, I mean, she teaches at Southeastern Seminary and, Wake Forest, North Carolina. And she was at Liberty, but she's good at helping us see the gospel even through a Jane Austen novel, and I love things like that. We got to interview Kent Kruger this past year, who's written a bunch of mystery novels, wrote Ordinary Grace, This Tender Land. Lay Finger, one of my favorite writers, he wrote Peace Like a River. I cannot recommend that book more, which is tremendous. So it's been a fun way of, kind of being like, those are my kind of heroes in a weird way, just these guys who can write about faith without it being the obvious central theme. I think that's it. It actually is the central theme. It's just underneath it all in terms of what motivates characters. That is good writing. That's what Cormac McCarthy does a lot of. That's, Stephen King, like it or not, he's a good mystery writer, but he writes about a lot of deep themes too. So it's fun. So I have keeps me sharp, at least trying.
Yeah. I know. Well, Dave, what an hour. I think we're 45 minutes to an hour, something like that already. And we could probably do this for another hour. And
let's bring on that at some point. We bring on the other bald guy and the almost bald, the guy who's like fighting the baldness. Yeah. And we could come up with a creative episode title at some point. So
I love it. Kurt, and he just launched his own podcast. So shout out Kurt.
I know.
And it's great. And it's so Kurt. It's just great. So all of it. So again, I go back to without our connection, there's not all those other connections, and I'm thankful for that forever. Two other things I got to say before we get off of here. One of them was you handed Heather Love Does at one of those weekends. You said, you got to read this book. At the time, nobody had ever heard of Bob Goff that I knew of, and now the guy's amazing, right? Yeah. And I, as you and I were messaging yesterday, I have extended invitation to Bob Goff. So if this hits Bob Goff, call me, because we need to get together. You need to come on the podcast. But no, that book, 2 books. So there's 5 books in my top 5. While we're talking books, Love Does is right there. It's got to be number 1, I think. Number 2 is probably Quiet Strength, Tony Dungy. And probably in that top 5 would be Grip of Grace. So it's so funny that you mentioned that, because I got to say that my view of Christianity, my view of my faith forever changed with Grip of Grace. Because I didn't understand grace. I didn't understand. It's not how I was. I wasn't raised in faith that way. And when I read Grip of Grace, I'm like, wow, that's radical stuff. And somebody had given me, what was it called? No Wonder They Call Him Savior. Was that the name of it? The Max Lucado book?
Yes. Yeah. That was an older one.
Somebody gave that to me for Christmas 20 years ago. And I'm like, that's cool. I wasn't really a reader then. And I kind of put it on the shelf. And then one day I'm like, I'm so bored. Here, I'll read this. And Max Lucado rocked my world. And so then I committed 1 year to read every Max Lucado book he ever wrote. And so I don't know if I got through that commitment, but if on that bookshelf back there, most of his books are here. I really, really got into it. And, but Grip of Grace was the one that was like, whoa, that's a game changer for me. And as you said, great, he's got a great voice, and, I appreciate you, Fearless, I think, was the book that, really where that was our connecting point. And, anyway, I just appreciate your time. I appreciate that connectedness again, because it's that 6 degrees of Kevin, the 6 degrees of David that have been so valuable to me in this life. And I'll never forget those things. So, and this has been awesome. It really has.
Thank you. I know, man, it's been fun. I love that you're doing this. So don't stop. And when you are ready, we will talk about the other thing. All right, there you go.
Someday, if I'm ever ready to write again, we'll see what happens. But man, I love you. Heather loves you. We miss you guys, and just so thankful you came on today.
You too, dude. Thank you.
Have a great weekend. Talk to you.
You too, man. See you. Bye.